really are excited to offer this topic today. It's focused on leadership through a philosophical lens. And leading today's webinar is Paul Lalonde. Paul is the Vice President of People and Culture at CETA of Cook County, a community action agency nonprofit organization that helps low-income people throughout Cook County, Illinois. He's also the owner of HR Logic, a small consulting side gig specializing in helping nonprofits solve their HR challenges. Paul's passionate about people and doing the right thing. He draws from a broad range of experiences as a nonprofit professional, a public speaker, an adjunct professor, and a writer on his blog, The HR Philosopher. He does this to inspire others to pursue philosophy as a means to better themselves and their relationships. Paul lives in the Chicago suburbs with his wife, Kristen, son, Ewan, and Cian, and their disobedient cat. Welcome, Paul. We appreciate you joining us today.
Hey, Ben, and thank you. And thank you to the DeKalb County Nonprofit Partnership for asking me to be here and starting this amazing series. I'm maybe a little biased, but that's okay. This is an idea that I've been working on for for a very long time. So to bring it to light means the world to me. So I hope everybody can learn from it. So with that, I will get our show on the road. So I believe I've shared my screen, and Ben can let me know if that is not the case. But overall, I think when you start with philosophy, the first question is always why, right? Why study philosophy? How can it add value to my life as a professional? How can it add value to my life? So philosophy matters because at some point in our lives, we must all ask ourselves a whole bunch of questions. What is true? Why do I believe it to be true? How should I live based on what I believe? So we ask ourselves these things, and then we have to answer them, right? The mistake is asking these questions in our personal lives only. No, there really can be no dichotomy between work life and personal life. They're one and the same in my estimation. Therefore, philosophy is to exist in one's personal endeavors. Philosophy must also exist in the boardroom. It has to exist on the assembly line. It has to exist at the welcome counter. To be a philosopher is to be a person of action. Action is the essence of philosophy at the end of the day. So you have to be able to turn your obstacles into triumphs. I always like this quote by Henry David Thoreau, who said, "To be a philosopher is not merely to have subtle thoughts, nor even to found a school. It is to solve some of the problems of life, not only theoretically, but practically." So philosophy belongs in the real world. The next question is always what? To me, what makes a good leader? How can I add philosophy to becoming a good leader? I think we ask ourselves this all the time. Think about the qualities of leaders you've followed and that you've learned from. What were they? And if you care to share, throw them up in the chat and share them with all the fellow attendees here. What qualities do you want to see in leaders that you follow? So I think there are a lot of traits of excellent leaders. I argue the one that makes a leader complete is the ability to not only learn, but to apply what they have learned. To want to learn means to be humble, to throw away your conceit, as Stoic philosopher Epictetus said. Being humble is to understand that you don't know everything and you must act on what you don't know. It's a constant process of self-improvement. Think about that process. Self-improvement is a process, right? So leaders are made, they're not born. Anyone can be a leader, and philosophy is that crucible in which leaders can be forged. So today we're going to go over philosophy, the perceptions of it, some philosophies in general, this idea of the philosopher king, which is where I apply the philosopher manager and get the inspiration and influence from, and then go over, what makes a leader, and then put it all together. If you're here today, I think on some level you want to try and figure out how can I become a better leader, and that's what I'm hoping to achieve with some of this. And then I'll share the resources and other sources for you to go read. And then the Agora. And for those that don't know what the Agora is, it was the center place of the ancient Greek city-states where people went to do business. They talked. That's where a lot of philosophers hung out in school. So that's just a fancy way of saying comments or questions. So let's begin. Is philosophy relevant to professionals and their careers? So you hear this a lot, you know, doesn't philosophy suck? I don't know. I think that's a really relative question, right? So if it's these type of things, it's not really relevant in the real world. A lot of people say, why would we study it? How can it add value to my life as a professional when it doesn't actually solve anything? Philosophers simply argue about arguing. You know, science tells us everything we need to know. I don't need philosophy. And philosophy is only old, white, bearded men, and so on and so on, and all these critiques. I'm going to argue that all this is false perceptions that need to be re-examined. You know, philosophy has made something of a resurgence in the professional world. Some high-profile examples would be Ryan Holiday, who is the author of what's called the Stoic Trilogy book series. That's the unofficial title. That's not what it's really called. And then he has a daily website called the Daily Stoic. Mark Manson is he started out his career as a blogger, but then he's heavily influenced by philosophy in his works, you can tell. And he wrote this excellent piece, Why We Need Philosophy Today. The Philosopher's Zone by David Rutledge, a businessman. And then less high profile than the others, but me, yours truly, the HR philosopher. I do not compare myself to these three. They are far and above me and my little world, but still, I'm influenced by them. So what is philosophy? Before we begin, you know, at its root cause, it's a love of wisdom. That's what it literally translates to in Greek. So philosophy is the inquiry into our understanding of reality, knowledge, and how we should live. Again, a love of wisdom. Why study? Well, it's taken from the Stoics. They study philosophy for one reason and one reason only. That's to become a better person. That's it. That's why you study philosophy. No other reason. Anything else is simply, as Friedrich Nietzsche said, critique of words by means of other words. A philosopher who is a philosopher is pretty much anyone who seeks the means to become a better person. And then the key is to implement those means. In high school, I used to sit back on the back porch with my grandpa. One day he turned to me and said, "Paul, you're a thinker." And I think this always stuck with me. You know, philosophy and theory always fascinated me. And eventually I discovered I have a deep influence of Stoicism in particular, which is a vastly misunderstood philosophy, but that's not for this conversation here. Epictetus, who is a Stoic philosopher from ancient Greece, said philosophy is for everyone. It's about living your best life and acting on what is right. That is philosophy. So in essence, I take that to heart and I work on becoming a better person, a better leader in my personal life and my professional life. You know, I hope to help influence on the act of philosophy for me and then on everybody else. So that's what I see as the benefits of philosophy. At the end of the day, it's becoming a better person for you and for the world at large. The breakdown, just a very high level. Again, I'm not here to be a philosophical teacher and go into these depths, but it's just to kind of give you an understanding in the background. Philosophy can usually be broken up into these three key elements. Physics, which is a study of the natural world and our surroundings. For this conversation, think of that as the workplace. Logic, which is the study of reasoning and thinking. Think of that as workplace policies and procedures. Then finally, ethics, you know, how to live with meaning, not only right and wrong. In the ancient context, ethics meant also meaning. Everything you do has a value to it and a meaning to it. So think of that as your workplace mission, vision, and values. What guides your organization and what guides you on a higher level. So, as far as the ancient Western philosophies are concerned, there's the big three: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. All philosophy in the West comes from these three men. Socrates was the first. He taught Plato, and then Plato taught Aristotle. So Socrates was biggest, most well known for the Socratic method, and that's the idea that you continually question everything to try to get to the root logic of why people believe what they really believe and what is truth. If anybody was a big fan of the show House with Dr. Gregory House, I was a big fan of that show. He implements the Socratic method with his team. Now, it's not always the best thing necessarily for those who've watched the show. It creates a lot of discontent. And there was a reason that Athens put Socrates to death, made him drink hemlock, because constantly questioning things can get under people's skin. But Socratic method started a lot of this. So Plato, he's best known for the Republic and the Academy, which is the very first school of any kind in the Western world. And then Aristotle, who is best known for politics, and actually he was a chief scientist, he was a physician, he was a teacher and advisor to Alexander the Great. So Aristotle had quite many, I think, achievements. The four schools, and again, this is just a very high level just to introduce you to these ideas and concepts. The four schools that came out of these three Titans' thoughts are cynicism, skepticism, Epicureanism, and Stoicism. So cynicism, according to them, the purpose of life is to live in virtue, in agreement with nature. So humans are reasoning creatures. People gain happiness by rigorous training and living in a way which is natural for themselves, rejecting wealth, rejecting power, rejecting fame, and even flouting openly conventions in a derisive public way. Cynic is a name, it comes from the Greek word for dog, because a lot of cynics would actually just live in the streets. Many of them were naked, and they just did their business wherever they wanted throughout the streets of Athens. So take that for what it's worth. The skepticism is a philosophy that claims that we can't really know that anything is the truth. So we question everything. Can anything ever really be known for sure? What is virtue? What is truth? How do you know of what it is? So Epicureanism declares pleasure. Happiness is the sole intrinsic value, and that's the goal at the end of the day. We think of that as hedonism today to a point, but that's not the goal of Epicureanism. Epicureanism was not to live an extravagant life and be hedonistic. It was more one of virtue was in simplicity. A happy life was a simple life. This rivaled Stoicism, which is the biggest and probably the most influential school today. Essentially, Stoicism is about rationality and the path to virtue. It was about emotions being thought of as being destructive. Now, it wasn't to ignore your emotions. Being a Stoic is often thought of as, I think wrongfully so, as they don't have emotions. They just don't, they don't agree with them, or they ignore them. No, it's the understanding that you control your emotions, so they don't control you. At the end of the day, the mere act of living virtuously, doing the right thing, is in and of itself happiness. So being a good person equates to happiness in Stoicism. So I keep saying these words, virtue. There are four primary virtues: wisdom, temperance, courage, and justice. So of course, wisdom is knowledge. It's knowing what is right and doing the right thing, right? Temperance, this is the knowledge that, you know, what Aristotle called the golden mean. It's sort of like self-control, right? It's to live in this world between excess, but then deficiency, you know? You want to be in the middle. You want to be balanced with temperance. Courage, this is persisting, resisting, doing what must be done despite your fear. You know, it's resisting the comfort of status quo, coming to your own judgment. Courage to face misfortune, to face death, to risk yourself for the sake of your fellow man and women and people. It's pretty much courage, to speak your mind and be who you are. And then finally, justice, which Marcus Aurelius says, probably the most important one. And in the ancient context, justice was much more broad than just a legal sense, Being just meant treating everybody right and fairly and doing no harm to others. Then there's some ancient philosophies. I won't go too far into them as much, but think of philosophy as evolution, right? There are a lot of animals with the same taxonomy that evolve similar traits despite being separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of years. There's a lot of overlaying themes in Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism that share with their Western counterparts. Particularly so, if you have time and interest, look up how similar Buddhism is to Stoicism in a lot of the core beliefs. It's pretty fascinating. And then there are modern philosophies, which I won't go into, but I encourage each of you to explore any and all of these philosophies. How will you know who you are unless you do the work, right? You try and figure that out. How will you develop your own leadership styles, traits, personalities, unless you search for your own meaning? And with that, I want to come to our first poll. So essentially, after hearing about these philosophies, which one most closely resonates with you? I'll give a few people time to kind of put in their answers as they're coming through. Okay, I'm not sure. Do we? Okay, to our hosts, is it there? There we go. So it looks like we have some skeptics among us. We have some Epicureans, and it looks like a lot of us are Stoics. So, and I just realized too, I kind of glossed over for time's sake some of the Eastern ones, so I apologize. I'm sure there's some Buddhist Taoists out there too, as much. So, moving on. Thank you for taking time to vote in that. So, Plato's Republic. This was his name for his city. And the best person to lead his city, in his estimation, was this idea called the Philosopher King. And the idea comes from the allegory of the cave. And I won't get too far into it, but essentially with the allegory of the cave, think of two people who are chained up for their entire life. And all they're doing is staring at a wall, and they can't move. And there's a light behind them. So all they see is these shadows. So in their estimation, reality is the shadows. But reality to them is not true reality because there's all this movement behind them and everything. The Philosopher King is the person who's able to get up, unchain themselves, leave the cave, and become enlightened. For anybody who's seen The Matrix, does that sound vaguely familiar to that plot line? But I digress. Sometimes people who leave the cave decide to go back into the cave. They're not true Philosopher Kings. So in his mind, a Philosopher King studies truth above all else, sees the world accurately as it truly is sufficiently able to deny themselves so they don't become corrupt, and then they're free of lust and greed. So what's the criteria to be a Philosopher King? Number one is they have to have an undying love of freedom, of wisdom and philosophy. They're selfless, intelligent. They are reliable. They have a willingness to live a simple life. They use their status, they use their knowledge, and they use their virtue to help other people, not themselves. And they pursue virtue and goodness for their own sake and not for any rewards. So doing the right thing at the end of the day is why they do what they do. not for any reward here or in any sort of future life. There are some historical examples of philosopher kings. Cyrus the Great, who was a king of Persia in some ancient times. Khosrow, who was also a king of the Sassanids, which is Iran, present-day Iran. And then, of course, Marcus Aurelius, who's probably the most well-known one. He was Roman emperor during the final days of the Pax Romana, during Rome's height and most glorious time. And he actually contributed to philosophical discussions and through his work called Meditations. And Meditations was simply just a journal that he wrote to himself all the time. And when he died, someone found it, and then it survived to this day. So he never intended for it to get published, which I think is pretty fascinating. But all that wisdom that he had by being a Stoic philosopher is to us to this day. It was an emperor, a philosopher king. So think about all those qualities I just named, and think about who you've worked for over your years in your career, in your profession. Who did you know that had an undying love of wisdom and learning? Who was selfless, intelligent, reliable? Who lived a simple life? Who pursued virtue for the right thing, not because it got them anywhere? So think about all those things. So connect the dots, do these qualities, and quality control. Speaking of qualities, my line got bumped up there, but do these qualities make for a good leader at the end of the day? I would argue that they do. So who is your philosopher manager? Another way of putting that is, who is your leader? Who are you as a leader? So if you think about all these terms, this was a study that was done by Zenger Volkman a couple years ago, but I think they ring true to today. So what leadership skills do you most need? And this is what they came up with. Inspires, motivates people. Displays high integrity, honesty, solves problems, analyzes issues, drives for results, communicates, builds relationships, all these type of things that we just talked about. Now, who's heard of Google before? Oh, okay, so everybody does. The phrase too, people leave managers, not companies. Now, a lot of studies have been done. Why do people leave? Why do people quit and then go to other places? There's varying degrees. Some people say, well, it's for more money. Yeah, that's usually pretty true. It's very rare for someone to quit a job to go take less money, although it happens. People leave because they can't grow, right? They've done all that they could and there's no promotion set for them. They like where they work, but the promotion, they need to go there. I think that's true too. Most people, though, if you look at study after study, and maybe in your own experience, conjecturally or not, people leave because their boss sucks and they create a horrible work environment for them. Again, it's the culture at the end of the day. People leave managers, they don't leave companies. So Google took this and wanted to find out, well, what makes people want to leave their manager, right? I think another way of saying that is, what qualities make our people leaders better to where our staff don't want to leave? So those are the type of questions that Google set out to answer. And in 2008, they began research into what makes a good manager, and they codenamed it Project Oxygen. They originally identified 8 behaviors that were common among their highest performing managers, and they began training all their managers to develop those behaviors. Over time, Google saw a marked improvement in key metrics such as employee turnover, satisfaction, performance, all those type of things. And then Google refined them over time to continue their research and continue the process. So today, there are 10 things that make a great leader according to Google's Project Oxygen. The first is they're a good coach. Now, a good coach avoids traps of solving every problem for their team as soon as it arises, right? Coaches rather use these problems as teachable moments. They guide, share insights at the right time, letting the team gain valuable experience along the way. Think about that. Can you think of an experience where you maybe felt frustrated that you went to your boss with an issue and they gave you advice and guided you, but they didn't solve it for you, only to realize afterward, oh, he or she was guiding me, and I solved it myself. Wow. Okay. So that's what a good coach does. Remember, the word coach has that sports implement. Coaches don't play for players. Players play. Coaches just help get them to maximize their output. So Project Oxygen identifies empowering teams and does not micromanage them. I don't know about you. Some people, I think most people hate micromanagers. Some people actually flourish under them, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But most people don't like being micromanaged because it doesn't seem like they have enough trust, whatever it ends up being, which is detrimental to relationships. In contrast, a good team lead, a good leader gives their people enough freedom to explore new ideas, be innovative, experiment, develop, adapt their own working style. You can think of this as, I don't care how the work gets done, as long as it gets done on a high quality level. So another thing to think about is great managers make sure their people have the tools and the flexibility they need to get their jobs done. Good leaders create an inclusive team environment, showing concern for success and well-being of everybody. Great managers make it a priority to build trust in their teams. Great leaders make it a priority to find out who their team is behind their work persona, right? Sometimes people put up walls, but good leaders try to figure out who that person is and how can I best lead them. I need to tailor my leadership style to gain the most out of this person. That's creating an inclusive team environment so that everybody has the opportunity to succeed. Another way of putting this is the idea of psychological safety. Teammates feel safe to take risks around other teammates. They feel confident that no one is going to embarrass them or punish them if it doesn't work out. A good leader is productive and results oriented. Again, I don't care how the job gets done, as long as it gets done in a high quality and ethical way. I would add the ethical in there. Good leaders realize that their teams are capable of so much more than what maybe even they think that they are. And then they find a way to get that out of them. So they use emotional intelligence to motivate their people and help them realize their potential. Good communicator listens and shares information. This always fascinates me, any study about leadership anywhere and how teams function, how leaders function, how just people function. Communication is always at the center of it. You have to be a good communicator. But rarely do we see, okay, well, what does that mean? And I'm not here to solve that right now, but great managers, part of that is they're great listeners. They helps them enable understanding. They seek first to understand, then to learn down the line. What was that? I messed that quote up. No, they seek first to understand, then to be understood. So I think David Covey said that. Leaders also share what they can, realizing transparency is beneficial. Don't hoard information. Let the light in. Be transparent with your team. Don't sugarcoat things. Treat them like adults. They share sincere, specific praise. Do that early. Do that often. But they don't hold back from giving, necessary, negative, constructive feedback. I think that's where a lot of leaders sometimes fail. We don't want to have hard conversations, right? We don't want to bring up these negative things. But at the end of the day, there's constructive conflict and destructive conflict. Good leaders have to have that courage, again, one of the virtues, to have the constructive conflict conversations. That's part of being a good communicator. And you let your team down when you don't do those type of things. Good leaders support career development, continual learning, right? If we're talking about the virtues again, wisdom, having people learn not only new things and new things that are going on in the industry or whatnot, but also learning from their mistakes. Great managers, great leaders invest in their people. They provide career paths. They realize that not everyone wants to follow the same road, and they live with that. If someone is fine with being whatever role they currently are in, then help them continue to succeed in that role. They don't push them to be promoted if that's not what they want. It's helping them succeed where they want to be and where they are, as long as that continues to get everybody towards the same end. So rather than support team, they support team members and help them reach their goals, wherever those goals happen to be. I think part of communication is having a clear vision and strategy for the team. They know where they want to go, how they're going to get there, and when they need to get there. And they don't keep their folks in the dark about it. They create a careful communication scope. So realistic expectations, how do you get there, all those type of things. Again, be open, honest, and direct with your team. Great leaders have key technical skills that help them advise the team. I think sometimes, and it's sort of related to being a good coach, when someone comes to you and they're unloading, sometimes they just need to unload. So you let them, right? We have the technical skills and we want to try and do it for them because we think that we're helping. But no, that's not what we need to do. Develop your technical skills to help advise them. Again, to get them to the other side of where they want to be after they've done venting to you. If an effective manager is brought into new development, they take time at the beginning to familiarize themselves with their people, their everyday work, challenges, all those type of things. So again, it's getting to know your team. They collaborate across the organization. This one is especially true in the not-for-profit world that I've seen in my experience. A lot of not-for-profits could have the same differing grants, right? And you can only pay for whatever work with that grant. So you have these little mini fiefdoms that sort of start, I think, codifying themselves. It's like, nope, I'm this program or I'm that program. It's like, no, we're all part of the same organization. Are there ways that we can collaborate together? Strong leaders destroy silos. They don't put them up. They don't have an us versus them mentality. They don't compete. It's not about separate. Great leaders have the ability to see the big picture and get people to follow that big picture logic. Then finally, strong decision makers. Great managers take the lead, right? Leaders take the lead. Lead is in the name of leader, right? So they make tough decisions, especially when no one else wants to. That's the cross that a lot of leaders have to carry and bear. They make sure everyone understands the reasons behind those decisions. This one is key. If you don't communicate why you're doing certain things, that just creates people to make it up on their own and figure out what they want rather than what the truth is. And that creates discourse amongst the team and amongst the organization. So the first step is in identifying effective management behaviors. That's easy, Execution, that's the hard part. So to have good leaders, one has to have a good team, right? Leaders need to assemble teams and then set them up for success. So Google, again, spent 2 years studying 180 teams. Specifically, they wanted to know, okay, well, if we have good leaders, how do we make good teams out of it, right? So they named it Project Aristotle after one of the forefathers of Western philosophy. So building the perfect team is more subjective than we would like to admit, I think, in a lot of ways. But Google was able to focus on 5 components that helped increase the likelihood that the dream team could be built. So these were the five areas of what makes a good team to Google. First is dependability. Team members get things done on time and they meet expectations. When you give someone a task, you don't need to check in on them. You trust and know that they're going to get it done. You can rely on your team. Structure and clarity. This one is so key that a lot of people miss, and I think it's made up with communication in a lot of ways, right? High-performing teams have clear goals that are communicated to them, and they have well-defined roles within that group. Everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. To use again, and I kind of always hesitate using sports analogies because not everyone's in the sports. I get it. But, you know, you have the quarterback who's the general behind the offensive line, right? And that offensive line, they're not allowed to catch the ball, so they don't try to. That's not their role. They know what their role is. If the offensive line was trying to be a wide receiver, that would just create confusion and then get head coaches fired. So get leaders fired. So at the end of the day, it's having structure and clarity, and everyone knows their role and what they need to be doing. Meaning, I think this one is especially important. I think it's always been important, but it's more acknowledged over the last decade or so. And it's not just with millennials. I think that's the stereotype. Millennials want meaning in their work. Like, no, I think everybody wants meaning in their work. I've seen older generations and younger generations, they want to know that their work matters. So work, whether it's right or wrong, in America especially, has personal significance to each person. But they just want to know that what they're doing at the end of the day matters. Going off of that is impact, right? The group, the team as a whole believes their work is purposeful and it's positively impacting the greater good. I think with not-for-profits, that's usually much easier to see, right? We have a direct pipeline to a lot of our clients that we're seeing. Without our services, they wouldn't be able to get to work. Without our services, they wouldn't eat. Without our services, they wouldn't be able to keep their lights on, or they wouldn't have representation in the courts, all those type of things. Sometimes with for-profits, that could be a little bit harder to see, but not always. I mean, look how impactful just these Google studies alone have been on, I think, a lot of workplaces. Look at how instrumental iPhones have been, Blackberries, all those type of things. Those are all for-profit outputs, yet the impact on the world can't be understated. Then finally, I sort of mentioned this earlier, and that's psychological safety. Now, what this means is, you know, think to meetings that you've been at. I think we've all been in meetings, and due to, I don't know whether it's outright fear or you just don't want to seem incompetent or you don't want to be second guessed, whatever it is, you've held back on asking a question or putting forth an idea. I think it's unnerving to feel like that in a lot of ways, and that's a microcosm of the environment that you're in. But a psychological safety, that is creating an environment where everyone's free to speak up, everyone is okay to fail, and no one's going to be called out for it in a negative way. Now, if you fail continuously at the same thing, that's a little bit different, right? But if you just fail once, you don't have that fear of, oh my God, I'm going to get fired kind of thing. No, psychological safety is being able to show up to work as who you are in a judgment-free zone where you can voice your opinions, you can ask questions, and you feel 100% safe about that. This one is the hardest, right? I think human beings, evolutionarily so, have developed judgment as part of our way of surviving. We need to judge one another. Is this person going to steal my food and kill me? And then, et cetera, et cetera. Is this tree hiding a saber-toothed tiger cat? I have to judge these type of situations. But we're trying as a society to move beyond a lot of those things because it's unnecessary now in many ways, at least in some workplace environments. So that kind of brings us to our second poll question. After having discussed a lot of this, which trait do you feel is the most important for a leader to have? Do you feel it is being a good coach? Do you think it's empowering the team and doesn't micromanage? Do you think it's creating an inclusive team environment? Is it being a good communicator? Or do you have another trait that you think is the most important for a leader to have? So I think some of the results are coming in. Yeah, there we go. So 35% wins out with creating an inclusive team environment, showing concern and success for the well-being. Followed closely by being a good communicator. and then empowering the team, and then is a good coach. Now, I think all these things are important, and thank you for voting on that, but it's important, I guess, inclusive team environment. I think that's a pretty good one to lead with. So, and the key, of course, with all of this, right, is to put it all together. So we talk about philosophy, we talk about leadership quotes and studies and all that type of stuff, but philosophy cannot be solely a matter of theory, right? So the idea is that we talk about these things today, but then you implement them in your life. Philosophy is an involved practice, just like riding a bike or writing or anything worth doing. The more you do it, the better you get, and you have to put effort into it to make it work and see results. So think about, what are your principles? How are you going to practice them? What do you value? Does your behavior match those values? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. What mark do you want to leave on the world? So what are your ruling principles, as Epictetus would have asked? So now I challenge you to become that philosopher manager, to become that leader. This is where the rubber starts hitting the road. It's time to get to work. Go and master whatever traits that you were thinking of in how you want to be seen as a manager. So you have to intertwine your own philosophy with how you want to be as a leader. You know, remember that I've been kind of trying to talk throughout this presentation. Philosophy is not about staying cooped up in an ivory tower, studying books on your own. It's not about going to a meditation retreat and being by yourself. You know, it's about making your life better each and every day. You know, it's creating that time to establish a philosophy for you, the working person. You know, something to help you get your work done. Philosophy is about getting work accomplished. Philosophy is for leaders. Philosophy should be your mission, vision, and value, lived out every day as an action. So my challenge to all of you is go and do it. You know, live your philosophy once you discover it. But don't stop there. You have to continue to learn. You have to continue to refine. You have to adjust. And you have to become better each day. Every day is an opportunity. Every moment is an opportunity to get better. Well, if you goofed up now, who cares? Move on, because you have a new opportunity right in front of you to practice that mission, vision, and value, and practice that philosophy that you want to achieve at the end of the day. So ask yourself these questions. What's your mission? What's your vision? And what's your values as a leader? This quote is perfect, I think. Not all readers are leaders, but all leaders are readers. By Harry Truman, former president. With that, again, it's going to take work, but I think everybody's is wholly capable of doing it if they so want to. So these are all the sources that I used during my 3 presentations. I just threw them all up here to begin with, that I would highly encourage you as starting points. These is not an exhaustive list. There's no way I could ever do an exhaustive list. And quite frankly, there's maybe some educational materials or philosophical materials up here or leadership materials that I didn't list that are on your list. You know, it's about finding your own way and molding philosophy with real life work experience. So I actually have 2 pages of these and all the links that are in there too. So you can, I will give this presentation to Ben, and then he can get the slides out to everybody. So I hope that wasn't too dense. I tried not making it. So now I guess we will go to the Agora, you know. After all of that, are there any comments? Do you have any questions? Is there any other thoughts? I would love to hear some more thoughts and debate as the Agora would have been. Then, of course, before that, this is my contact info, shameless self-promotion. the biggest thing you can do is to learn from other people. And I love learning from folks. So I would love if all of you would reach out and connect with me. If you're on LinkedIn, if you're on Twitter, if you want to read my blog, all those type of things, so I can learn from you. So with all that, I appreciate, again, the time that they gave me here. And with that, I guess I'll turn it over to Ben to see what are our next steps.
Well, Paul, I'm a bit biased too, but I just so appreciate the content that you just shared. That was fantastic. And I can't help but point out the irony in your statement about philosophy being for white guys with beards. And there you are as a kind of an emoji character with beard and all. But thank you for that. And we have had some questions come in, so I want to spend some time on that. One person asked, how does philosophy support self-confidence, especially as a leader?
Self-competence?
Confidence.
Confidence. Oh, I hear you. Okay. That's a very good question. And I will preface by saying that, the joke with philosophy is, oh, you're never wrong, haha, because, it's just about your own experiences. And there's some truth to that, some not, like with any joke. But I will preface by saying I can only speak for myself in my own understanding of it, and would encourage everybody that they can find definitely for themselves as well, their own version of the truth. But to me, confidence that comes through philosophy is with repetitiveness. Confidence in yourself is knowing that you're doing a good job at the end of the day for you. And if I look to Stoicism, which I'm a amateur Stoic at best, they focus on what they can control, and they just leave the rest. If I can't control this, I don't focus on it. So if I can focus on what I can control, you're going to get wins through that. And the more wins you get, little ones, you build up over time, and that builds up your confidence. And I think it's just repetitiveness. It's doing the same thing over and over again. It's like Bruce Lee once said, I don't fear the man who knows 1,000 punches. I fear the man who knows one punch but practiced it 1,000 times. So I think with repetitiveness and doing and mastering, that's where the confidence comes from.
Thanks, Paul. Another question's come in asking, how do we adapt these principles of leadership as the workplace has changed to more remote working?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think with anything, leadership changes over time, and we need to figure out ways to adapt over time, right? There used to be a time where the command style of leadership was probably the more preferred and the one that worked decades ago. That wouldn't fly today in a lot of places. So people have adjusted how they change their leadership styles. It's finding out what works for you and your team. And that's where, again, the psychological safety comes into play. Don't be afraid to try new things. And if it fails, who cares if it fails? You move on to the next thing and you try to figure it out. And once something works for you and the team, stick with it and build upon that. And then there's your success. And don't ever feel that leaders also listen, right? So ask your team. All right, if you're at home, how can we make this work? How do you like to be led at home? Ask them and then do it, and then see what happens. And if it's working, great. If it's not working, then have that conversation with them again and adjust.
Another just comment has come through in the question saying, great job, Paul. I appreciate the discussion surrounding psychological safety. Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add related to psychological safety at this time, Paul?
No, other than I think it is a work in progress, and people should always strive to that at the end of the day. I think psychological safety is about treating people the way they want to be treated and creating a safe space for everybody and anybody, and just treating people with respect and fairness.
Mm-hmm. A few questions have come in to me directly. This person asks, I'm earlier in my career. How can new leaders dip their toes into these philosophies? And maybe the way I'm interpreting that, maybe is there one of those resources or a couple of those resources you shared that would be really good introductory material?
Yeah, I think I'm still sharing my screen. Let me go back. I'm incredibly biased by Ryan Holiday. I'm going to be upfront and honest with it. The book The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. It's not a book about Stoicism, but it's heavily influenced by Stoicism, and that just got me down the rabbit hole, so to speak. I think just by picking up any book, that's where you start. Picking up any one of these or something else, it's just starting out. And if you're not getting anything out of it, don't be afraid to just stop reading and move on. There's only so much time that we have, so use it in finding what you need. I would also suggest, these two articles by Mark Manson, Why I Am Not a Stoic, and then Why We Need Philosophy. Those are primers that are very high level that can get people discovering different things. But I would pick up any one of those. The Meditations by Marcus Aurelius is a great introductory one, or even just a Philosophy 101 book. I think any one of those things, as long as you just pick it up and you start somewhere.
Another question references an article that Forbes published a few days ago that says empathy is the most important or valued leadership trait based on some studies that have been done recently. And it's linked to this decline in mental health and the challenges that people have faced over the last 18 months and so on. So this person's asking, how does that relate to the philosophies that you talked about? And I did find the Forbes article, and I'll drop that in the chat for folks as well.
No, thank you. I did not see that article, but I've seen many with that similar, I think, theme, that empathy is a key skill that leaders need to have. And I've been personally saying that to myself for at least a decade, that I try and lead with empathy. It goes back to what my good friend Eric Kershat, who is somewhat of a philosopher himself in many ways, introduced me to the idea of the platinum rule, which is treat people the way they want to be treated. Don't treat people the way you want to be treated, even though that's better than treating them like not well. But when you treat people the way they want to be treated, it opens up a bridge in a dialogue, right? So how do you know how they want to be treated? Well, you have to ask them. And by asking them, it shows that you care about them and that you're trying to learn, which is the definition of empathy, right? Is trying to understand what that person is going through and trying to do better by it. I think that is the key skill all leaders need to develop if they want to be successful moving forward.
We have one more question. And this person says, going back to the philosopher King with regard to wisdom and seeking truth, with so much mistruth in our society today, what are your thoughts on how to truly seek truth in our leadership roles?
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent question. And I think it boils down to your own personal values, your own personal mission, vision, and values. Think about, when you're trying to make decisions for what we should do as an organization, you avoid mission creep, which is, maybe not the right path that you want to go on, which has some similarities with truth versus not truth, by grounding yourself in your foundation of what your values are, right? So if my value personally is empathy, and I'm being questioned about, okay, how do I treat this individual? What do I do? Do I have to fire them? Do I have to reassign them? Any one of those things, I look back to the empathy thing, which helps me find my own truth. Or not only find my own, but find the truth. I think it goes back to what I had mentioned kind of earlier, is that all this is something that everybody works on every single day. And will you make bad decisions? Yes, every single person does. But it's getting back up and building that resistance a resilience and understanding, yes, I'm going to mess up, but I have tomorrow to not mess up and to fix it and to move forward. So it's just constantly allowing yourself the space and grace to allow yourself for that.
Thank you, Paul. Is there anything else you'd like to add? That concludes the questions that we've received.
No, this has been, from my end, incredibly, I think, fulfilling and fun and all those type of things. And I would love to connect with you if we're not connected already, and continue the conversation offline in our Zoom world. That's a new thing. Continue it offline, right? So I just thank you, Ben, and everybody for joining.
Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you for the insightful questions to those who submitted. Those were really thoughtful, and just appreciate your dialogue around that. We appreciate you attending today. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will send a follow-up evaluation where you can share your feedback about this session. And in that email, we'll also include the recording and the slide deck that Paul presented. So we encourage you to visit dcmp.org, follow us on Facebook for upcoming trainings and opportunities, or to sign up for our newsletter if you don't receive that yet. Next week on Friday, we'll host our digital marketing meetup, and the topic this time around is Canva and how it can be used for graphic design and marketing. And we're going to be offering that in a hybrid format. So you can either join by Zoom or in person, but we do ask that you register ahead of time, and you can do that on our website. Looking ahead to October 20th, we'll host part 2 of this webinar series. I believe Mark shared the link to that in the chat, but Paul's going to be back to speak with us a little bit more about well-being and mental health, again, kind of through that lens of what philosophers have to say and what philosophies can tell us about those topics. So you can register for that at dcmp.org as well. So once again, thank you for attending, and a big thank you goes to Paul Lalonde for sharing his time and expertise with all of us today. Thank you all.